Chapter 1. Adonis Weston watched as his football players ran back into the locker room to shower after practice. School was starting in less than a month, and he was determined that his team would be ready. It sometimes felt strange coaching the team that had been his own football team's mortal enemy in high school, but it felt good too. His phone rang, and he dug it out of his pocket, looking at the display. Bob Calendar. He and Bob had been friends for years, and he always enjoyed talking to him. Hello. Hey, Don. I have a favor to ask of you. Do you think you could run out to the ranch for a meeting sometime today? Bob lived on the ranch where he'd been raised with his 12 sisters outside of Cauldron Valley. And face every one of your sisters at once? Really? Bob laughed. They're not so scary. But there are 12 of them. Don always teased his friend about the sheer number of sisters he had. You come from a big family too. Come on. I need you, man. Need me? Huh. Bob had never claimed to need Don or anyone else before. He was a pretty independent guy, running the entire girls' camp that his family hosted at their ranch. At least he was the official boss. His sisters, all 3 million of them, helped as well. Don shuddered as he thought about the little girls at the ranch. There were more of them than there were Calendar sisters. Yup. How's noon? Barry has one of her cooking classes going with the girls, and they're making something that should be edible. Don chuckled. That's so tempting. He knew Barry was a great cook, but he wasn't so sure about the prepubescent girls she was teaching. Barry made a bunch of caramel apple pies for dessert. Caramel apple pies? Don felt his stomach rumble. It was after 10, and he'd had breakfast at 5. Yeah, I'm in. If all else failed, he'd eat dessert first and have lunch at home when he was finished. Good. We can have our little meeting before or after our culinary experience. Don chuckled. It was going to be a culinary experience, all right. Eating what a half-dozen preteen girls thought was gourmet cooking was always something to be experienced. Sure. I'll come before. Practice just finished. How are the chrysanthemums looking this year? Bob asked. He'd played for the team and had been Don and his best friend Colton's rival when they were in high school. Don thought chrysanthemums was the worst mascot for a high school in recorded history, but he didn't say anything. Everyone in Cauldron Valley was pretty proud of the school and its name. Pretty good. Tony Jenkins has a right arm to die for. I'm seriously impressed with the kid. And he's big. We don't need to worry about him getting trampled and broken in the first game of the year. How big are we talking? Bob asked. 6'3", and he works out daily. Kid is built like a Mack truck. Awesome. And he has moves? Yup. He's just a sophomore, but we've got him starting as quarterback. We'll see how he does under pressure. Bob made a noise of agreement. All right. I'll see you when you get here. Just come to my office. You can't meet me at my truck? Don asked. There were always so many girls at that camp during the summer. Girls upon girls. It was like the whole world turned pink. This time he wasn't joking. He didn't want to walk through the mob of girls alone. Bob clucked. You can coach a football team, but you can't walk through a camp full of preteen girls? Fine. I'll be there. But if I'm scarred for life, it will be your fault. You'll live. Don could just see Bob rolling his eyes. Whatever. Those girls could be menaces. When they'd been friends as teens, the girls would wolf whistle when he walked by and stick out their non-existent chests at him. It got old fast. After making sure the boys had all left the locker room, he shut off the lights and drove out to the Calendar Ranch. There were girls everywhere, and they were all doing something different. He picked his way through the groups and was shocked as one particularly bold girl pinched his butt. It was so weird to walk through. Ugh. He moved as quickly as he could to get away from the masses. He was almost safe when he ran straight smack into someone, and then he had to help her to her feet. She wasn't little, so at first he assumed she was one of Bob's sisters. And then he got a good look at her face. It was even worse. Minerva Conklin. Minnie. The woman made him crazy. He let go of her as fast as he'd touched her, as if he'd been burned. Minnie blinked up at him through her thick glasses, her eyes appearing owlish. "Oh, hi, Dawn." "Hi, Minnie. Are you okay?" He couldn't just walk away, not knowing if he'd injured her, but he wanted to. She was scary. "I'm fine." She brushed off the seat of her shorts, obviously not bothered. He dodged around her, determined to get to Bob's office as quickly as he could. Standing and talking to Minnie could only lead to bad things. Minnie called to him as he rushed away. "I don't know why you're afraid of me." "I'm not afraid of you," he said, turning around and glaring at her. But he was. He was so afraid. The last few times they'd seen each other, they'd been at New Year's Eve parties, and they'd always ended up next to each other at midnight. He didn't know if she'd planned it or if he'd just naturally gravitated toward her, but they always seemed to kiss. And those kisses, well, if they hadn't been in a crowd of people, he was sure they'd have ended up in bed. What was it about her that made his heart race and other parts of him stand up and take notice? Minnie followed him and stood less than a foot in front of him, looking up at him. She was a tall woman, but Don was not a small man. "You are afraid of me. You're afraid to find out where your feelings for me will take you. Chicken." She poked him in the chest as she spoke. "What makes you think that? You avoid me. You skipped your own sister's wedding just to not have to be around me." "I didn't. I had to work." He knew the excuse was feeble. He could have worked the following day and done the same paperwork he'd done during Athena's wedding, but he'd not wanted to run into Minnie. "You're a football coach." It was a Sunday during the summer. "You did not have to work." "What do you know about what hours a football coach has to work?" "I'm not as dumb as you think I am, Don Weston. And I think you should take me out on a date. Prove to me you're not afraid." Don took a step back, shaking his head. "That was not a good idea." "I don't think so." "So you admit you're afraid of me?" she asked, smirking at him. He sighed. "I'm not afraid of you. I'm just not interested." "I was the other half of those kisses, Don." "You're interested." "What are you doing here anyway?" he asked, trying to change the subject. He didn't want to take her out. "Same thing I do here every day all summer. I teach the girls how to make jewelry and barrettes out of silk flowers." Minnie stepped toward him again. "I'll make it easy for you. We'll double date with Aaron and Athena." "What good will that do?" Don asked. The woman confused him. "You will have another guy there to talk to, and it won't be as intense. A double date and then a single date, and then you can tell me you're not afraid of me, and I'll believe you." Don frowned at her. Maybe he needed to do it just to prove to himself that he wasn't afraid of her. He didn't want to be afraid of her. He could go out with her twice and get her out of his system, and then he'd be free to date others. "Fine. Friday night. You arrange it with Athena and Aaron." Minnie's entire face lit up. "I will." Then she turned and scurried away before he could change his mind. Dawn stood there for a moment, staring after her. He'd always thought she was weird, and not just because she and his sister Athena were besties. No, it was more than that. She really was weird. But, oh, he was attracted to her like he never had been any other girl. He turned and headed toward Bob's office, not able to get his mind off Minnie. He didn't know what it was about her, but there was something between them that was pure magic. Bob's office was in a building next to the ranch's main house, and Don walked right in. There were several offices there, but Bob's was the biggest. Everyone else on the ranch operated under him after all. Don knocked on the open door, and Bob lifted his head with a grin. "You made it through all of the prepubescent girls without dying. Congratulations." "One of them pinched my butt," Don said, sitting down in the chair across from Bob's. "They are way too bold when they're in a pack that way." Bob chuckled. "Yeah, notice I'm in here and not out there?" Don shook his head. "I can't believe I agreed to come here during summer camp. What do you want from me?" Bob turned all business then. Don hadn't really seen his friend in business mode before, and it was strange watching it happen. "We've decided we're going to expand the camps next year and reach out to boys as well. Just so you're not going to go into the teenager business. Imagine all the rampant hormones. We haven't quite figured out that aspect yet, but we will. We've been tossing around ideas, and we think we want to add a football aspect to the afternoons for the boys. It would be 2 hours a day all summer long. We don't want to commit to something like that in the brochures without a coach." Don nodded. "And that's where I come in?" "That's where you come in. I know you do football with your team in the early mornings all summer, so we'd make sure to schedule only afternoons for the camps. We'd want you 5 days a week for 2 hours a day." Bob named a figure that Don didn't feel like he could just turn down right away. Let me think on it. I'll have an answer to you Monday?" It was Wednesday, and that would give Don 5 days to think about it and make a decision. "That would be great." Bob leaned back in his chair. "There are others we could ask, of course, but you're our first choice. I really hope you'll do it. It would be fun to work with you." It could be. Don wasn't so sure about all the girls though. But if there were boys too, maybe the little but pinchers would be on their best behavior. Would the girls be able to choose to be part of the football portion of the program? Bob sighed. "I didn't want to let them, but my sisters outvoted me. They all went into the girls can do anything boys can do spiel, and I was ready to run away and hide." "I'm not sure it's fair that you're outnumbered the way you are," Don said. "Okay, just so I know what I'm getting into. I really don't mind girls as part of it as long as they are there for football and not for the chance to be tackled by boys." Bob smiled. "I can't guarantee anyone's motives of course, but we'll hope they're there for the right reasons." Don heard his stomach rumble. "So when do we get to participate in this amazing culinary experience?" he asked. "Oh, now. The cooking class always serves me, Mom, Dad, and any visitors. They make enough for 20, because they eat with us, but they jump up and down to refill our drinks and stuff. It's not terrible. And we're rewarded with caramel apple pie." "Does Barry like teaching the cooking?" "It's her jam." Bob laughed. "She teaches them to make jam too." "You think you're so funny. You have dad jokes down, and you're not even a dad yet." "This is true. And after working with kids my whole life, I'm not sure I ever want to be a dad." Don shook his head at his friend. "You say that, but I know better." Bob grinned and shrugged. Don had no doubt that when Bob found the right girl, he'd be more than willing to have 13 kids just like his parents. When they got into the main house, they sat down at the table and Barry, a pretty blonde with sparkling green eyes and a personality to match, had the girls bring the food in. While they waited, Don smiled at Mr. and Mrs. Callender. "Thanks for the invitation." Mrs. Callender smiled. "You've never needed to wait for an invitation, Don. You're like a member of the family. Though you can't be adopted as one of us, because we like having the lucky number of 13 children." Don nodded. Cauldron Valley was weird, but he was part of it now, and their superstitions had to be acknowledged. "I can understand that," he fibbed. "I saw you talking to Minnie when you got here," Mrs. Callender said. I do think it's good that you two are finally acknowledging your feelings for each other. Dawn blushed. I don't have feelings for Minnie. And pigs don't fly on Groundhog Day. Mrs. Callender responded with a smile. Dawn wasn't sure what that meant. Pigs didn't fly on Groundhog Day, as far as he knew. Thankfully, the food was placed on the table in front of them. We made a chicken and cheese quiche today, Barry announced. Sounds good to me, Dawn said. As they ate, the girls sat at the huge table. There seemed to be 6 of them in the cooking class that day. Do you rotate who cooks every day? Dawn asked. Barry shook her head. I get the same group of girls from 10 to 12 every morning for a month at a time. And then they move on. This is our 4th week together, so these are the most complicated meals the girls will cook. This is very good, Dawn said. I'm impressed. One of the girls looked at him. I'm impressed with how handsome you are. Do you like younger women? Dawn shook his head adamantly. I really don't. I like women my age or older. That's sad, she said, looking down at her quiche with a frown. Dawn looked at Bob, who was trying to hide a chuckle. Why couldn't his friend help him out just this once? After the meal, the pie was served with ice cream on top. Dawn took one bite and closed his eyes. Barry, will you marry me? Barry laughed and shook her head. No. I won't. Thanks for asking, though. It seemed to be the thing to do after tasting this pie. It was a moral necessity. So was telling you no, Barry said. The girls ate quickly and hurried off to the kitchen to do the dishes. Dawn ate his pie without speaking again, but he knew he'd complimented Barry in a way she would always remember. He liked the girl. The 9th of the women the Callender family had adopted as infants. He knew because Barry was short for September, and for some reason, they were each named for a month of the year. Thankfully, they didn't all go by their full names. After they'd eaten, Bob walked with Dawn out to his car. They were stopped by Jana, the oldest of the Callender sisters. Bob, I have a supply list, and I need this stuff for next week. Bob took the list from her and frowned at it. Why didn't you get stuff ordered sooner? I did, but one of the Huckley twins dumped the feathers all over the ground and then the other one jumped on them. The girls are sweet most of the time, but when they decide to be mischievous, they're really awful. All right. I'll get them ordered. Bob folded up the list and put it in his pocket. You need a break? Jana shook her head. I can handle it. I just need supplies. With that, she hurried off toward one of the tents set up. Dawn shook his head. I don't know how you manage this chaos. Bob shrugged. I've known my whole life it was my destiny to run it. I think Jana could do it as well as I do, but she's much better at the crafts than I am. I can see that. Jana's always been a go-getter. When they reached his truck, Dawn pulled his keys from his pocket. I'll let you know before noon on Monday. Does that work? Bob nodded. That's perfect. I really hope you'll say yes. You're the right man for the job. But no pressure, right? Dawn smiled as he climbed into his truck. Nope. None. Not from me, anyway. But if you think about all those kids who come here every day all summer long who love football. Dawn shook his head. Next week. Talk to you then. As Dawn drove back to the outskirts of Cauldron Valley, where he had a house on the hill, overlooking the entire town, he thought about what the extra money could mean. He wanted to renovate his kitchen without adding to his debt. Just one summer would be enough for what he had in mind. It was definitely something to think about. And so much better than thinking about Minnie, who he had a date with Friday night. He didn't know what he'd been thinking, accepting a date with her. The first time they'd met, she'd squirted glue in his face and told him they couldn't be friends. Sure, she'd been 5 at the time, but it hadn't been the way he'd wanted to meet anyone. His mother had spent hours getting the Elmer's glue from his hair. But the times they'd kissed had been even more memorable. It didn't make sense how strongly he was attracted to her while at the same time, he felt the need to stay as far away from her as possible. Probably his strong sense of self-preservation. Athena had told him he would be perfect for many more times than he could count, and she'd always seemed to be pushing the two of them together. So he'd run the other way. Who could trust their baddie sister's instincts about their love life? Not him. He pulled into his driveway, still seeing Minnie's beautiful blue eyes through her thick glasses. The woman haunted him. He dreamed of her. Perhaps actually getting to know her would get her out of his system and he could move on and date women who suited him better. Something had to give. Chapter 2. On her way home from work that night, Minnie practically was squealing with excitement as she called her best friend, and Dawn's sister, Athena. He agreed to a double date with you and Aaron on Friday night. Do you believe it? Athena said, I told you it would happen. You just had to give it a little time. I've been in love with him since I was 5, Athena. I've given it a lot of time. But it's happening. So how did you convince him? Athena asked. Well, I told him he was afraid of me, and he denied it, and then I told him the only way I'd believe it is if he agreed to a date with me. He was hemming and hawing like he was afraid to agree, so I told him that it could be a double date with you and Aaron. You had better not have plans. Athena laughed. I don't think we do, but if we did, I'd be sure to cancel them for this. I can't miss your first date with Dawn. We're going to be sisters. He's agreed to 2 dates. One with you guys and one without. That doesn't mean sisters yet, but soon, I hope. I hope so too. You're closer to me than I am to any of my sisters. They all think I'm odd. You are odd. That's what I love best about you. Minnie really did squeal then. I don't want to wait until Friday. Well, you need to if that's when you set it up for. Do you want to come to my place to get ready? I can let Dawn know that's what we decided to do. And there I can don clothes for Dawn? Well, you certainly can't go on a date naked, though I'm not sure what society has against the nude human form. Minnie laughed. I'm so glad you're going to be there for me, Winnie, she said, calling her friend by her real name, and one that only she was allowed to use, but only in private. I'm glad too. We goddesses have to stick together. Love you, Minnie said as she stared at the small house she shared with a woman who didn't understand her at all. Love you right back. Minnie got her bag of silk flowers and carried them into the house. 3 months out of the year, and then during Christmas break from school, she taught others how to craft things from silk flowers. The rest of the year, she worked on the flowers herself and built up inventories for craft fairs. When she walked into the house, her roommate was sprawled on the couch, watching a very loud sitcom. I put your packages on your bed, Angela said, not looking at her. Minnie decided not to remind her roommate she'd asked her not to go into her room while she wasn't home. Instead, she nodded. Thanks. Going into her room, she saw all the packages that she knew were silk flowers. She couldn't wait to open them and see what the Amazon fairies had sent her this time. She always made the same order, but there were small variations each time. And those variations not only kept her on her toes, but helped her to create beautiful art in the form of necklaces, barrettes, and headbands. But first, she laid on her back for a moment in the dark of her room and stared at the ceiling. She was going on a date with Don Weston. Adonis and Minerva would make a perfect couple. She just knew it. Asterisk. By Friday night, Don had picked up his phone to cancel his date with Minnie at least a dozen times. She was a bit batty, which is why she hung out with his sister Athena so much. The two of them were peas in a pod. He wasn't sure he could handle dating her. Wouldn't it be like dating his own sister? He didn't cancel, because he knew she'd accuse him of being afraid of her again. No, he was going through with it if it killed him. When he stepped outside, he saw some people riding bikes in front of his house with matching masks. He didn't understand the mask thing, but everyone was wearing them. Even his football players wore them to practice, though he made them take them off. How could you exercise with a mask on your face? He drove the short distance to the house Aaron shared with Athena. He didn't know Aaron well, but he seemed like he was a good man. And he knew that Athena loved her husband in her own special way. When he got to the house, he knocked and waited, surprised when a pretty woman came to the door. "Hi. Is Athena here?" "Of course, she is. This is her house." That voice. He looked at the girl again. "Where are your glasses?" He actually kind of liked Minnie's glasses, but without them, the woman was making his knees weak. This couldn't be a good thing. Not at all. "I decided to wear my contacts for our date." "Don't you like them?" For a minute, he was worried she was going to cry. "You look amazing," he answered honestly, stepping inside. "Where are Athena and Aaron?" "Aaron's still getting ready." Athena said he got caught up in something he was doing and lost track of time. She gestured to the couch. "Do you want to sit while we wait for them?" "Sit?" "With Minnie." "Alone?" This was not how the evening was supposed to go. "Sure." He walked to the couch and sat down on the very end, but wasn't surprised when she sat in the middle, right next to him. "How's practice going?" Minnie asked. He shrugged. "I think we're going to have a really good team this year." "And what are you teaching this year?" she asked. She knew all the coaches had to teach different classes, and he could teach both history and English. "I'm doing sophomore honors English this year. It's going to be fun, because there's not a set curriculum, and I can make them read whatever I want." "There's no set curriculum?" she asked. "Not for honors, which is why it's exciting. I'll have 2 regular classes, 1 honors, and then I'll coach. Will be a busy year." "Sounds like it. Are you glad you teach?" "I really am. I don't think I could do anything else. I'm trying to decide if I want to coach football at the Calendar Ranch during the summers." "Have they definitely decided to bring boys in then?" "I knew they were talking about it." Bob made it sound like it was definitely going to happen. "I think it's good. The boys need to be loved on just as much as the girls do." Minnie looked up as Aaron and Athena walked into the room. "Are you guys ready?" Athena nodded. "We are." "Hey, Don." "Hey, Athena." Don got to his feet, walking to the other man and shaking hands with him. "Good to see you." Aaron nodded, looking like he was half asleep. "You too." "Where are we going to eat?" Minnie asked. Aaron shrugged. "I'm letting Don make all the decisions tonight," he said, hiding a yawn behind his hand. "Did we wake you?" Don asked, eyeing his brother-in-law curiously. He thought the other man was working with Athena, but he knew his sister went to work at the crack of dawn. Aaron shrugged. "I've got my days and nights turned around. I do that sometimes." "I see." Don wasn't sure what to make of that. "Let's go to the steak place, or would you prefer Japanese?" Aaron smiled. "Always steak." "Always," Athena said, shaking her head. "At least they have salad at the steak place." "And steak," Dawn said enthusiastically. Minnie smiled at Dawn, reaching her hand out and taking his. Dawn was surprised for a moment by the gesture, but he liked to feel her hand in his. They all walked out to the driveway. "We should probably take separate cars," Minnie said. "Aaron probably needs to go to bed right after supper, and I don't want to have to ask Athena to take me home." Dawn nodded skeptically. He wasn't sure he was ready to be alone with Minnie, which was why this had been a double date. Now he was going to be alone with her anyway. Sure. He got into his truck and put it in reverse, backing out of the driveway. How did you get to Athena's house? She picked me up on her way home from work. Was Aaron with her? He asked. Minnie shook her head. And that's odd. She told me he was working with her and had quit his job at the ranch. That's what I thought. But he was sleeping. He had to have been. I have no idea. I haven't pried, but there seems to be something weird going on there. Dawn nodded. Yup. He drove toward the restaurant, wondering what to say. She was Athena's friend, but she looked so beautiful that night, he didn't even want to take his eyes off her. He needed to remember she was Daffy Minnie. As they drove, she watched him. I'm glad you're taking me out tonight, she said softly. Dawn wasn't sure how to answer that. I think I am too. No, you're just glad we won't be alone all night. Are you afraid of all women, or just me? I'm not afraid of you. I'm afraid of what I feel for you. She laughed softly. All right. When they got to the restaurant, Dawn realized they were the only people without masks. There seemed to be more of them every day. No mask for you? He asked Minnie. I'm not sure I understand the reason behind them. Is it a fashion statement? They don't look very comfortable. No, they really don't. Dawn shrugged. I don't know either. Athena and Aaron joined them, and Athena was wearing a mask with a peace sign on it. Why are you wearing a mask? Dawn asked his sister. No idea, but everyone else is, so I thought it would be impolite not to join them. Athena was clinging to Aaron's arm. Dawn shook his head, still not understanding, but it took too much brain power to try to understand any of his sisters. Well, except Didi, and she was even confusing sometimes, but they had that twin thing going on, and it helped a little. They were given a booth in the corner of the restaurant, and the four of them stared at the menus for a little while as they figured out what to order. Dawn had scooted into the booth and Minnie had followed him, sitting much closer than he would have liked. Her hand was on his knee, and he liked that a little more than he wanted to. I'm getting the salad with grilled chicken, Athena announced. Minnie sighed. I wish I had your willpower, but I don't. I want a steak. Aaron smiled at Minnie. I approve. I'm getting a steak too. Me too, Dawn said. You sure you don't want to join us in the red meat party? Athena shook her head. No thank you. The cows told me to eat more chicken. You've been watching too many Chick-fil-A commercials, Dawn said, shaking his head. You've always had trouble with the difference between weirdness and reality. Be nice, Aaron said, but he was hiding a grin. After they'd ordered, Minnie leaned against Dawn, and without thinking, he put his arm around her. It was obviously what she'd been after, because she sighed contentedly. Are we doing anything after supper? She asked. Aaron answered for them all. I can't. I have something to do. Dawn narrowed his eyes at his brother-in-law. What kind of work are you doing in the middle of the night? Aaron seemed to struggle to find an answer for a moment. Oh, just tell them, Athena said. But you two have to swear not to tell another living soul. Tell them what? Dawn asked. He wasn't sure what kind of secret his sister and her husband were hiding, but it was strange. Very strange. Aaron took a sip of the water in front of him, as if he was getting up the courage. I'm a romance writer. I write under a pseudonym, but I'm very popular in romance circles. Dawn laughed a little, sure the other man must be joking, but when he saw the serious look on Athena's face, he knew it was true. Seriously? That's pretty incredible. Aaron smiled, nodding. I worked at the ranch all day and wrote all night. I didn't need to work at the ranch, but it was my cover, you know? Now we tell everyone I'm working with Athena, but I really think it's time I come clean and shout my successes to the world. I'm not ashamed of what I do. Don wasn't sure what to think. The man across from him was a big hulking man who wrote romance novels. It just didn't seem to fit him. I didn't even know there were guys who wrote romances. There aren't a lot of us, and those who do usually use a pen name like I do. They don't want women to not read their books because they're written by men. If that makes any kind of sense. It does to me, Athena said. He's my favorite author, but I never would have picked up one of his romances if I'd known it was written by a man. Minnie stared at Athena for a moment before gasping. Wait, he's Aaron McLean? I read him too. She didn't pause as she pushed her napkin across the table. Will you autograph this for me? Next time I see you, I'm bringing books. Lots and lots of your books. Aaron smiled and signed his pen name on the napkin, pushing it back across to Minnie. I'm happy to sign anything you bring me. Don was still trying to figure out what to think when Athena yelled, Ow. What's wrong with you? Don asked his sister. Minnie kicked me. Hard. You deserve it. I might kick you again. Minnie said, glaring at her friend. You're married to our favorite author, and you didn't even bother to tell me? Some friend you are. It's his secret to tell. Not mine. You could have told me. I've kept all your secrets since we were 5. Athena sighed. I just didn't feel like I could tell anyone. Aaron smiled at Minnie. I think she's still trying to get used to the idea that she's sleeping with the man who writes her favorite sex scenes. Don stuck his fingers in his ears. La la la. My sister doesn't have sex. La la la. Minnie laughed. I won't tell him any of the details you've given me. I promise. Aaron looked embarrassed. Athena gave you details? Well, yeah. That's what best friends do, Athena said, shaking her head. Though Minnie shouldn't have told you I give her details. You shouldn't give her details, Aaron said. There are no details, because my sister is still a virgin and will be until the day she dies, Don said. He refused to believe otherwise. At least Didi didn't flaunt her sex life with Rhodey in his face. It would be worse to know his twin was having sex. Athena rolled her eyes. What are you going to say when I end up pregnant? That I didn't know immaculate conceptions were still a thing, but it's cool that they are. And we're changing the subject. Don looked around the restaurant. What do you think of the decor in here? Is that the best you can do? Athena asked. She looked at Minnie. We have 2 more greenhouses on the way if you ever decide to switch to real flowers. I couldn't with my allergies. I'm doing good to keep my contacts in my eyes for as long as I have. Minnie sighed dramatically. It's hard to love flowers as much as I do and never get to be around real ones. Do the girls ever bring you flowers at camp? Don asked. He hadn't realized she was allergic to flowers, but he filed it away at the back of his mind. He would be sure never to bring her flowers. Of course, he was only seeing her once more, so there wouldn't be much opportunity to do so. There's one girl who tries every summer, but I calmly explain I'm allergic to flowers, and she takes them away. Minnie shrugged. That's the life I lead. I wish I could work in the greenhouses with Athena, but I'm just sure I'd die of hay fever. Don squeezed her a little where his arm was still around her. It felt strange to be touching her this way. And all he could really think about was kissing her. He knew she was going to be all for it when he took her home that night. But first they had to get through supper. The appetizer was brought out, and Athena only ate 1 piece of the bacon-wrapped shrimp. I love this stuff, but it's just not good for your body. She looked at Aaron. You'll limit yourself, right? Well, I would, but we ordered 2 plates, and I have to do my share. Athena glared at Aaron. He never listens to any of my advice for his health. Of course, he doesn't, Don said as he finished chewing his third shrimp. Your advice about his health tastes like cardboard. Eat the good stuff. Minnie wasn't sure if she should side with her friend or with the men, but in the end, her taste buds won out. Chapter 3. After they'd finished their meal, and all eaten dessert, much to the annoyance of Athena, Don still wasn't ready for the evening to end. Do you all want to find something else to do? He asked, as they all headed for their cars. No time, Aaron reminded him. But you three feel free to do what you want. Athena clutched Aaron's hand. I'm going home with Aaron, and I'll sleep while he works. It's how we do things. Minnie nodded. Her friend had always been an extremely early riser. I'm game to do something else. I'm going to need a ride home either way. Don wondered for a moment if it was smart to be alone with Minnie, but then he decided that he couldn't imagine her being at all dangerous. I'll take you home, he said. They'd decide if they wanted to do something more in the car. Minnie smiled at him, and his heart started beating faster. He didn't know what it was about her, but there was something he found awfully special, even if she was best friends with his most annoying sister. In his truck, he started to automatically drive toward her place, having looked up her address, before their date. Do you want to maybe watch a movie? He asked. I know the theater in town is still closed for cleaning, but we could go back to your place and watch Netflix or something. She sighed dramatically. Going back to my place would mean dealing with Angela, the world's worst roommate. She would sit between us on the couch and insist that we watch whatever she was watching. No, my place is really not an option. I guess we could go to my room, but the only place to sit is the bed, and I'm not quite ready to invite you to share my bed with me like two sex-starved teenagers. He grimaced. Have you thought about finding a place without a roommate? Or even finding a new roommate? He realized then he knew little about her upbringing. He only knew she was friends with Athena, but until that night it had been enough for him. I haven't been able to find another roommate, and a place on my own is out of my price range. I'm working so hard to build up my business that every dime matters. She shrugged. I deal with Angela. She thought about how the other woman's name meant angel for the 50 billionth time. She was anything but an angel. I can understand that. He shook his head. We'll go back to my place. He had never taken a date back there before, but mostly because he didn't date often. It was always one bad first date and then another bad first date. No one ever made it to a second date, because they were always compared to the annoying woman beside him. We should probably stop and get movie snacks first. I don't think I have anything. I'll be hitting the grocery store in the morning. That works. We can stop at the store and get whatever we want for tonight. I wouldn't even mind helping you with your grocery shopping. The very idea of grocery shopping with him filled her with a little bit of excitement. Shopping together was something real couples did. Nah, we'll just get what we need tonight. I don't need you seeing what I buy at the store and reporting back to Athena. She's always on me about eating like a child anyway. Minnie laughed, shaking her head. I don't think you need to worry about that. Well, as long as you promise not to tell her what I eat when she's not looking. I thought you felt the same way as her about food. That's how it seemed before tonight, anyway. When I'm with her, I usually just give in. I don't have the energy to fight with her about the chemicals and bad things I put in my body. She gets ridiculous at times. Yes, she does. Why was I sure you were more like her than you are? Minnie shrugged. Seriously, you've only ever seen us together. Athena has one of those personalities that just kind of railroads you if you're not willing to fight back, and I'm never willing to fight back. It's just not worth it to me. So, I eat her carrot sticks and celery dipped in homemade hummus, and when I'm done, I sneak into the bathroom and eat a candy bar I have tucked into my purse. Or beef jerky. Or really, both is often the answer. Beef and sugar? Oh, she wouldn't like that at all, would she? Minnie laughed, shaking her head. That's why I don't tell her. See how well I know her? You know her very well, obviously. He parked to the side of the grocery store, and they walked in together. Are we going for sweet or salty? He asked. Oh, please. The answer is always both. He smiled. I think I could get used to having you around. I'd like that a lot, she said with a smile, heading straight for the chip aisle. Now we need to have popcorn, of course, but then we also need to have a sweet snack. Maybe 2 or 3 sweet snacks, so we can share. Oh, I have a hankering for Rolos, he said. And I want something fruity like Sour Patch Kids. We'll get both and then one more for good measure, she said. I'll run and grab those. Race you to the front, he said, his competitive side coming out. They reached the front of the store, both of them laughing, when he spotted one of his football players with his father. Don tried to look like a serious teacher, but failed miserably, and he knew it. Hi, Jackson. Coach Weston. Jackson looked at his father. Dad, this is my football coach. It's nice to meet you, Don said, holding his hand out for the other man. Mr. Taylor was one of the few fathers he'd never met from the boys on his team. Mr. Taylor nodded. Nice to meet you too. Another boy came running up and grabbed Mr. Taylor's arm. This is my younger boy, Paul. I sure hope you can whip him into shape when it becomes time. Paul grinned. Dad doesn't think it should be my life goal to be an artist, and he wants me to play some sports. I don't mind sports, but being an artist is what I really want to do with my life. Don smiled. I think that's a great goal. The calendars are opening their camp to boys next summer, and they've asked me to coach. I'm still trying to decide if that's what I want to do. Paul looked at his father with wide eyes. The boy couldn't have been over 9, and he'd be the perfect age for the summer camp, which was why Don had said something. I could take art and football there. Oh, please, Dad. Mr. Taylor sighed, wrapping his arm around the boy's neck and rubbing his knuckles on top of Paul's head. I guess we might be able to talk about that. Don smiled. I hope you'll let him. There are so many things he could explore doing there. I would even be willing to teach him to make necklaces and barrettes out of silk flowers, Minnie said enthusiastically. Paul made a face. I don't think so. Your loss, Minnie said. Don shook his head at her. We're going to go and watch a movie. I'll see you bright and early Monday morning, Jackson. I'll be there, Coach. As they walked away, Don had a smile on his face. Jackson was a good player, not his best, but solid. He never missed practice, and his grades were always good enough for him to play. He was exactly the player that Don wanted to have on his team. They checked out and hurried back to the truck. Don settled into the truck and waited as Minnie got in beside him. I don't think your student's little brother wanted to learn to make jewelry out of silk flowers. Imagine the pretty things he could make for the women in his life. Don laughed. His mother died when he was little, and I think he's a little too young for a girlfriend, so he's probably not thinking far enough down the road to when he'll have a girlfriend to make them for. What happened to the mom? That's so sad. She was a nurse and got hit by a drunk driver, from what I understand. They lived in Helena at the time, and they moved here to get away from memories. Don shook his head. Without them being here at the time, I have little knowledge. Jackson doesn't talk about it. I'm sure that's hard for all of them, Minnie said softly. When they got to his house, Minnie stared at it in awe. How can you afford this on a high school coach's salary? She asked. He shrugged. I'm not just a high school coach. I'm a super saver. From my first job on, I had my eye on the prize. I mowed lawns every summer from the age of 11, and I never spent a dime. And then when I got real jobs, I did the same thing. I went to college on a football scholarship, and I had a full ride. I never spent anything there either, and I never took out a student loan. I lived in the cheapest dorm on campus, and I made sure I had a meal plan that let me eat all I wanted for every meal. And I worked when it was the off-season for football. He shrugged. By the time I graduated from college, I had a good amount of money saved, and then I lived at home while I coached the first couple of years. So, I had even more saved when it was time for me to buy. I put more than half down, and I'm paying off the rest. My whole family calls me cheap, but I prefer the word frugal or the phrase goal-driven. She smiled at that. I'm impressed. As they walked in, she stood staring at the deck on the back of the house, which overlooked the entire valley. I don't know how you can ever stay inside for even a minute with a view like that waiting outside. I honestly don't spend a ton of time inside during the summer. During the school year, there isn't as much time to do anything. He put the treats they'd chosen on the counter and opened the sliding glass door to the deck. She stepped out looking at the little collection of comfortable patio furniture and the fire pit there. Instead of sitting, she walked right to the deck and leaned on the rail, staring out over the valley. I've never looked at Cauldron Valley from this angle before. It looks amazing. If someone comes here to do any kind of work on the house, they always make sure to step out here. People who have lived here their entire lives have never seen it from this angle. Don moved beside her, leaning on his forearms and looking out with her. The sun was setting, and it was the perfect time to be on the deck. He was a morning person, but his deck faced the west, and he wanted to spend every day on it. It really is amazing. She sighed contentedly. This is the type of thing she'd always imagined doing with Don. Looking out over the valley and watching the sunset together seemed like her very own idea of paradise. Tell me what you'll do with your honors English class. I need to do 2 Shakespeare plays, and I'm thinking we'll do Julius Caesar and Macbeth. Those are never taught in the other levels. And then I want to do Cyrano de Bergerac, which is a favorite of mine. I'll even show them the movie with Depardieu after we've read it. Maybe All Quiet on the Western Front, but I haven't decided for sure. They need to understand the hardships people have gone through to get to where we are today. Interesting. And I never would have pegged you for a Cyrano man. It's one of my favorites too. Were you in Mrs. Daly's honors English? He asked, referring to the teacher who had done the sophomore honors back in Black Aces. She nodded excitedly. Yes, I was. That's the class that taught me to love that book with everything inside me. It's one of the best. He grinned at her, surprised there was something as simple as a favorite play they both had in common. My favorite is the line at the end that Roxanne says. In the last act. That she's only loved one man in her life and now she's lost him? Twice? Yeah, I cry every time I read that line. You've read it more than once? She laughed softly. I reread it every year and have since I was 15. It's special. He smiled. It really is. I'm so glad you understand that. He'd tried to talk about Cyrano on dates before, and most women just stared at him blankly or said, the guy with the big nose, like he was nothing more than that. It was strange. Who wouldn't? You read it once, and you love it for life. At least that's the way it was with me. Athena had never quite understood her passion for Cyrano, though they'd been in the class together. Tell me about your family. She shrugged. It wasn't a topic she'd ever talked about much, not even with Athena. My parents got married because my mom was pregnant with me. They never really seemed to like each other, though they're still married. They just kind of float through life, determined not to get in each other's way. He frowned. Sounds very different than how we grew up. Did you ever notice that if Athena and I had an overnight, it was always at your house and not mine? That's why. I didn't want her to realize just how very, Silent, it was to live with parents who cared nothing for each other. She shrugged. And they got married while they were still in high school, which means neither went to college or did anything to better themselves. I grew up very poor. He frowned, wishing he'd realized that. I didn't know that. She shrugged. I did my best to hide it. I started doing crafts when I was little, so I could cover up the holes in the clothes my mom got for me from resale shops. It made me feel more normal if people couldn't tell how ragged my jeans were. Mom worked as a waitress the whole time, and Dad worked on different ranches around town. And Dad drank. But she didn't say that. She wasn't ready for him to know that her father was an alcoholic who liked to knock around anyone smaller than he was. She couldn't count the number of times she'd been knocked into walls. My happiest memories growing up were always going to your house after school, where your mom would have a plate of cookies waiting and have some sort of project planned for Athena and me after our homework was done. I didn't know Mom did that. She shrugged. You always disappeared as soon as the cookies were gone, but Athena and I would stick around, and your mom would teach us some gardening if it was late spring or early fall. Or she'd find us a little project to do in the winter. I can't tell you how many embroidery hoops Athena and I went through. After a while, I realized I could use the embroidery skills your mom taught to cover the holes in my clothes. I think that's why she spent the time teaching us. That's really sweet. I had no idea. Minnie nodded. Your mom was so much more of a mom to me than mine ever was. He frowned. Let's go watch that movie. He wanted to get her mind off of sad things. Chapter 4. While he popped the popcorn, she found a bowl and mixed up the 3 different candies. You like candy corn? He asked, noticing what she'd put into the bowl for the first time. I love it, she said. I know I'm not supposed to, and Athena jumps all over me for eating it, but it makes me happy. I love how you're mixing them. Do you always do that? He asked. She shook her head. Always. I like to reach into the bowl and be surprised. He put 2 glasses on the counter and filled them with ice. She poured a can of pop into each glass. I'm glad you like to eat fun stuff for movies like I do, Dawn told her. Who doesn't? Minnie asked, rolling her eyes. Athena. Yeah, that's definitely true. The last time I asked for movie snacks, she made a veggie tray with a healthy dip. I was so disappointed. She shook her head. It's hard to believe you two are brother and sister. Yeah, Didi and I are a whole lot more alike than Athena and I. I can see that. I really like Didi. She's impossible not to like, he said. She's the best twin a man could ask for. How did I forget you two are twins? She asked. I've always known that, but it still seems strange every time someone mentions it. He shrugged. We've always been twins. Well, obviously, she said with a laugh. He took the popcorn from the microwave and dumped it into a bowl. Can you get the candy and 1 drink? She nodded, doing that while he took the popcorn and the other, and she followed him into the living room. What are we watching anyway? He asked. She shrugged. I have no idea. I figured you'd choose something. Nah. Ladies' choice tonight. Minnie took the remote he handed her as soon as they were seated close together on the sofa. Okay. She flipped through Netflix and found the mystery show she'd been binging in the evenings while she worked on her barrettes. He looked at the title and frowned. That sounds like a mystery. It is. This is the series I've been binge watching. You're going to love the detective, because she's not really a detective. She's a little old lady who likes to knit and lives with her cat. But she solves mysteries by watching the news and thinking about the facts. The police have started going to her at the point I am in the show. Have you seen this one yet? He asked skeptically. Nope. I thought it would be more fun if we tried to figure it out at the same time. He grinned. I thought you'd choose some sappy rom-com or some other chick flick. Well, I like chick flicks, but I tend to watch them with female friends, and not with guys I know will hate them. Not that she'd been out with a guy before. No, she was like the girl in the Conway Twitty song, Don't Cry Joni. She was saving all her kisses, just for him. Don wasn't sure why he felt a pang of annoyance at the idea of her going out with another guy. He'd never shown any interest in her, so it didn't make sense that she would wait for him. But he wanted her to. I think we'll both like this. They reached into the popcorn bowl at the same time, and her fingers tingled at his touch. She jerked and turned to look at him. He looked down into her deep blue eyes, and he knew they couldn't start the movie yet. He needed to kiss her before they could do anything else. He set the popcorn bowl on the floor, and he removed the candy from her hands, setting that on the end table beside him. Then he put her pop next to his, and leaned down toward her, his lips settling gently on hers, fully intending to keep the kiss light. When she wrapped her arms around his shoulders and pressed herself against him, well, that's when he deepened the kiss. Within moments, she was on his lap, and she was sinking into the kiss. He gathered her as close as he could, pressing her chest against his own. You make me feel so beautiful, she whispered to him. You are beautiful, Minnie. You are the most beautiful woman in the world. She chuckled. You know I'm not going to sleep with you, no matter how many times you say that, she said with a laugh. I know. I'd never expect you to, especially not on the first date. Not before marriage, she said. I saw what an unexpected pregnancy did to my parents. Though, if you keep kissing me like that, I may be dragging you off to the bedroom. He laughed. Okay, then we're stopping this now. He put the bowl of popcorn between them on the couch. Now eat your popcorn like a good girl. Hey, Dawn? Yeah? I can't reach the candy. He chuckled as he put it between them on the couch, and they settled in to watch the show. They talked through it, each of them building on the other's theories about whodunit. And finally, toward the end, they both shouted, "It was Jack," at the same time. Jack was the victim's lover, and the police had been looking at her husband. They looked at each other and laughed. Let's see if we're right, Minnie said softly. She couldn't believe she was spending the evening with this man she cared about so much more than she'd ever dreamed she could care for anyone. Dawn was pretty fabulous to her way of thinking. When the little old lady told the police who the killer was, Dawn raised his hands in the sign for a goal. We did it. Minnie giggled. We should take this show on the road, solving mysteries around the world. We really should. I think I could do anything with you by my side, he said softly. She smiled. I like that idea. How did I never realize you were a person other than just being Athena's friend? You were blind. I'm glad you can see again. He chuckled softly. Me too. Wanting to take her out the next day, he thought about what they could do. How would you feel about spending the whole day with me tomorrow? We'll take a picnic lunch to eat by the river in Helena, and then we'll do the whole Helena scavenger hunt. I've had friends do it, and they say it's just amazing. And then we'll have a nice supper before driving back to town. I'd love that. Sounds like a perfect day. And it would mean an entire day with him. She'd planned to spend the day building her inventory for an upcoming craft fair, but she had enough left from the last one. A few new special pieces, and she'd be set. Wonderful. I'll pick you up around 10? Would that work out for you? Minnie nodded excitedly. That sounds wonderful. Marcy Callender told me she did it on a first date last summer, and even though the guy was an utter dud, she still had fun. Well, if it's good enough for Marcy Callender. She loved the idea of doing something fun and a little touristy with him. Do you want me to pack the picnic? She asked, thinking of how little food was always in her kitchen, Because Angela took her food and didn't buy any of her own. Nah. I'll do the picnic. I'll probably grab something from the grocery store deli. Sounds good, she said. Now I can go to sleep tonight and dream about seeing you again tomorrow. He cupped her cheek in his hand and leaned over to kiss her over the now empty bowls between them. I like the idea of you dreaming about me. Well, I have for a very long time. I hope knowing that helps you somehow. He chuckled. I'm not sure how it would, but it does make me smile. He stifled a yawn. It was early yet, but he got up at 4, so it felt late to him. I'm going to drive you home. I was up at 4 for football practice. She all but flinched. Are you an early bird like Athena? Not really. I'm up that early out of necessity, but it doesn't bother me too much. Are you a night owl? Not at all. I just don't wake up at 4. 5:30 is more my speed. He smiled at that, glad to hear she wasn't up all night. It would be good if they were on the same schedule for the most part. 5:30 is a luxury. I think I'll sleep that late tomorrow though. He sighed. I really don't want our night to end. You really surprised me, Minnie. And this night was exactly what I expected. Perfect in every way. She reached out and grasped his hand. Thank you. For what? For a lovely time. And for taking my dare. He chuckled. Who would have thought I'd have such a good time on a date I was dared to go on? Me, she said, getting to her feet. I need to get home and get my contacts out anyway. The smoke from all these fires around us is making it hard on me. My allergies are not pleased. My eyes have been burning too. Don't worry about contacts tomorrow. I think you look good with or without your glasses. Are you sure? She felt that she looked a little bug-eyed with as strong as her prescription needed to be. I'm positive. And don't dress up tomorrow. I'm going to be wearing jeans and a t-shirt. I'll be casual, she said. As they walked to the truck, her mind was still on his kisses. The whole drive to her place was made mostly in silence. It was after 10 and both of them had been up early. In her driveway, he kissed her goodbye. 10:30. Don't forget. She laughed. I've been waiting for this moment since I was 5 and went to your house the first time. How could I be late? I guess you couldn't. He watched her go in and waited until he heard her door click closed before getting back into the truck. He shook his head at himself, wondering how on earth he'd gotten himself attached to Minnie of all people. Then he remembered her kisses and the how was answered. She packed a punch. Asterisk. Minnie was up early, and though she'd said she'd be casual, she wore a pair of nice jeans and a pretty blouse to their date. Yes, it was mostly casual, but she wouldn't have chosen it for a scavenger hunt if she hadn't worried that their dinner would be somewhere that shorts were inappropriate. She took his advice and wore her glasses and not her contacts. Her eyes were screaming for relief from the smoke in the air, and she knew with being outside all day, she'd have tears pouring down her face all day if she wore her contacts. He was there at exactly 10:30, and she smiled, knowing it was his mother's training that made him so punctual. Most people in the valley had their own sense of time, and it made her crazy. If you said you'd be somewhere at 1, then you should be there at 1, and not 1:15 or worse, 3:30, like usually happened. She knew her parents didn't feel the same way about time as she did, but she'd been half-raised by his. On the way, they talked about a lot of different interests, but nothing terribly important. They spent time talking about favorite books they'd read, and he was surprised they shared so many interests. Did you believe Snape was evil up until his death? She asked, when they stumbled on the fact that they'd both read the Harry Potter books multiple times. I trusted Dumbledore. Even though it looked like Snape had killed Dumbledore, I knew there was something more going on than we were shown. I still think the way they killed Snape was just wrong. He should have gone out with wand blazing, not being attacked by one of Voldemort's Horcruxes. I agree with that. But it was a good way for Harry to know the full truth about Snape and his feelings for Lily. I loved that Harry named his son after the man who had tormented him so much, finally understanding why. Yes, Dawn said. And I knew from book 1 that Harry and Ginny were destined to be together. I liked it when she started dating other people, though, because I don't think he treated her well. He glanced over at Minnie, and though he saw a parallel to their own relationship, he didn't say anything about that. I think Ginny should have waited for him. If she'd known that she was meant to be his, she had no business snogging other boys. He laughed. Snogging. That word sounds so funny to me. Me too. So, I use it when I can. I liked snogging with you last night, Dawn. Well, know that I plan a lot more of that for our future. I want us to be able to snog a lot in the days to come. Minnie smiled softly. So that means you want to take me out after today? Well, probably. Unless you do something to utterly repulse me today, I can see asking you out again. But I don't want to be married as fast as some of my siblings, Athena in particular, got married. We can take our own sweet time. Minnie wasn't so sure with the kisses they'd shared and her determination to wait until their wedding night, but she didn't argue with him. There was no point. For their picnic, he'd brought deli fried chicken, potato salad, baked beans, and brownies with cream cheese frosting. Did you make any of this? She asked as they unpacked the small cooler he had brought everything in. He shook his head. No time. I just picked it up while I did my grocery shopping this morning. What big plans do you have for tomorrow? She asked. She wasn't fishing to spend the day with him, and she hoped it didn't come across that way. She realized the moment the words left her mouth that it might. Laundry and getting some freezer cooking done. I've mentioned the fact that I'm frugal, and after working such long hours all day, I tend to get home and throw something in the microwave for supper. If I plan in advance and have a bunch of freezer meals made up, I can save a lot of money. So, every week during the summer, I do about 16 freezer meals, and then I eat on them for as long as I can. I do a bunch during Thanksgiving and more during Christmas and spring breaks. I just don't like wasting my money on frozen food. Minnie nodded. I tried that a couple of times, but Angela eats any food I buy. I've learned to stop at the store on my way home from work, buy what I need for that one meal, make it, and eat it all. If there are any leftovers, she'll eat them before I get the chance. She shrugged. During the summers, the first would take my lunches if I could, but I usually get a few bites of whatever berries classes make. Wow. She's really an awful roommate. She is. I'd be better off living in Athena's old shed. Do you think she'd let me? She probably would, but I wouldn't. You should rent a room from Mom and Dad. I'd pay too much in gas getting back and forth to work. No, I'll put up with Angela until I just can't anymore. He shook his head. I don't like it. I don't particularly either, but that's how life goes. You do what you have to do, and not always just what you want to do. That's true. Dawn reached for one of the brownies and took a big bite. Cream cheese frosting is decent, but not as good as Mom's. I have her recipe for cream cheese frosting, she said. I use it whenever I'm baking a cake. Well, then, next time I'm looking for good frosting, I'll let you know. Do you bake things that need frosting often? She asked. A lot more often than you'd think. I really do most of my own cooking and baking. I don't throw my money away. On their 2 dates, he'd spent a lot more money than he usually did. He knew he shouldn't, but he wanted to spoil her. I think that's really smart, she said again. I do my best to save as much as I can when I can. I just tend to always need more supplies for my business. Yeah, and I'm not starting a new business. I'm just working at the high school. There's no just there. You work hard. I've heard such good things about you and what you do with the football team. Everyone is in awe of you. He smiled. I believe in doing the best job I can possibly do. I know. I've met your parents. She had the kind of respect for his parents that she wished she could have for her own. Chapter 5. The scavenger hunt was more fun than either Dawn or Minnie had expected. They spent the entire 2 hours of the adventure walking to different landmarks in town and answering trivia questions, as well as solving fun challenges. The group was only 10, but the other 8 were a family, so Dawn and Minnie did their own thing and had much more fun in the process. When they were finished, they spent a few hours exploring the shopping district and riding the Great Northern Carousel, where everyone seemed to be wearing masks again. And they had several animals closed off, saying it was necessary for proper social distancing, whatever that meant. For supper, they went to the Silver Star Steak Company, preferring to eat outside on the metal patio furniture, rather than in the noisy restaurant. The meal was amazing, and they both walked away full and content. On their trip back, Minnie couldn't stop smiling. It truly had been an amazing experience for her. Do you want help cooking tomorrow? She asked. She didn't want to give up another day with him. Yes, she needed to do quite a bit of work, but spending time with him is something she'd been trying to do for her entire life. Would you mind? He asked. Having someone to do some of the steps for me would really help me out. I could come over after church, she suggested. Sounds good to me. I'll see you at church, and you can just come home with me if you want. People would assume the worst. He sighed. They would. Okay, you can follow me home. I don't need small-town tongues gossiping about us, and neither do you. She stifled a yawn. Today was amazing. You picked the perfect activity. The day had been spent together within a crowd. To her, it was one of the most special things she'd ever done, and she had saved the pics from the scavenger hunt and their ticket stubs for her scrapbook. He dropped her off, kissing her softly. Don't let Angela get to you, and I'll see you in the morning. I'm counting the minutes, she said softly. When she opened the door, she wasn't surprised to see Angela lounging on the couch. I found a new roommate, Angela said. You did? I didn't know you were looking for a new roommate. Minnie's mind was spinning. She really didn't want to have to move back in with her parents, and she certainly couldn't move in with Athena. You never have any good snacks, Angela said. Minnie blinked a couple of times, trying to understand exactly what was happening. When are you moving out? I'm not. You are. By the end of the week. Angela didn't even bother to pause her show as she gave Minnie a nasty look. I can't be ready to move that quickly. You're going to have to be. Only my name is on the lease. Minnie knew the other girl was right. She'd been there for a year longer than Minnie had, and they'd never bothered to put Minnie's name on the lease. What day is the new roommate moving in? Minnie knew better than to keep arguing. It would be better if she just accepted things and found somewhere else to live. Quickly. Saturday. Good luck. The smirk on Angela's face made Minnie want to throw something at her, but she just went into her room and closed the door. She'd had such an amazing day, only to have her world come crashing down around her. Taking a deep breath, she called Athena. Hey you. Hi. Do you guys still have any of the boxes from your move? Yeah, they're all in the garage. I've been waiting for someone to need them. Are you finally moving away from that awful Angela? She found a new roommate, and I need to be out by Saturday. Oh, Minnie. Why are people so mean? There was a pause, and it was obvious to Minnie that Athena had muted her for a moment. I'm on my way in Aaron's truck. I'll have boxes, and I'll help you pack. Minnie looked at the clock. It's after 8. You're worth staying up late. With that, Athena ended the call, and Minnie started to dig through her things, putting piles in different places. Thankfully, she only had the one room to pack up. The rest of the house was all Angela's. When Minnie heard Athena pull up, she went to the door and opened it wide, ignoring Angela's complaints that she had a guest entirely. "Come in and thank you." Minnie and Athena carried the boxes into Minnie's room and they both started packing up the closet, leaving enough clothes out for a week. "How was the rest of your date with Dawn last night?" Athena asked as she carefully wrapped up things with some newspaper she'd brought with her. "It was wonderful. And today was fantastic." Minnie told her friend about the date in Helena that day. "And I'm supposed to go over and help him make freezer meals tomorrow, but I got home, and Angela said I had to move out by Saturday." "Is there anyone you know who needs a roommate?" Athena asked. Minnie shook her head. "No, but I'm sure I could stay with the Calendars short term while I find a place. I've been needing to get out of here for a long time anyway." "Yes, you have," Athena said. "But not like this." The two women had the room packed up in 2 hours flat. There were enough clothes left out for a week, and a long suitcase stood ready to be packed with those things. "If you talk to the Calendars in the morning and make arrangements, Aaron and I could help you move on Saturday morning. He can stay up a little late, and I will already be up." "Sounds wonderful. I'm glad you're my friend." Minnie swiped a tear from her face, thankful things were coming together so easily. Athena hugged her close. "I wish you and Dawn had been dating for just a little longer. Then you could just get married and it would be easier." Minnie looked at her friend as if she'd lost her mind. "We've already dated a whole lot longer than you and Aaron, who danced like once at a reception and decided to marry." Athena nodded. "We did. And we should have taken more time to get to know one another. Don't get me wrong, Aaron and I love each other, but the first few weeks were really rough on us." "Really?" Minnie asked, surprised. "Really. It took him a while to be willing to open up about being a romance writer, and I thought he was an absolute wastrel, spending all his time playing computer games, when really, he was finishing a book." Athena shook her head. "Get to know him first. That's the best advice I can give you." Minnie was astonished her friend would be willing to admit she'd made a mistake. She never admitted anything she did was less than perfect. "I'll do my best." But she agreed with Athena that it would be nice if they were in a place where they could marry, because she wasn't looking forward to asking for a favor from the Calendars. The next morning, she found Mrs. Calendar at church, who was as sweet could be, but Minnie still found her rather odd. Who adopted 12 girls just so they could have a lucky number of children and make it 13? It made little sense. Mrs. Calendar's face lit up when Minnie approached. "How's my favorite flower girl?" The term was odd, because it usually meant something else, but Mrs. Calendar had always called her that. "I'm in trouble," Minnie said softly. "Oh, no. You're pregnant, aren't you?" Mrs. Calendar said, her voice carrying across the small church. Minnie could feel everyone staring at her, and she blushed profusely. "No, I'm not pregnant," Minnie said loudly. "My roommate is kicking me out, and only her name is on the lease." "Oh, that's so much better than an unwed pregnancy," Mrs. Calendar said with a smile. "Since the overnight camps are finished for the summer, you could live in one of the cabins. You know they have running water and air conditioning. You could live there for a while." Minnie exhaled, relieved. "I was hoping you'd say that. I wouldn't let you be thrown away like yesterday's rubbish, Minnie. You're too valuable to use for that." Minnie smiled. "Thank you. You are so good to me. I'll need to move in on Saturday morning. Does that work?" "That's perfect, because we'll have no girls then. It will be a lot easier that way." "Thanks again." I'll see you in the morning. Minnie went in search of Athena, knowing she'd be there without Aaron. Aaron worked all night and slept all day, which meant he didn't make it to church very often at all. When she found her friend, she put her purse on the pew beside Athena's. I'm going to use one of the calendar's cabins. It's got everything I need, and they're happy to let me stay there for a while. Oh, good. I was worried you wouldn't find a place so quickly. Thank heavens for the calendars. At that moment, Minnie spotted Don talking to Colton, his best friend, at the back of the church, and she wanted to just stare at him for hours upon hours. The man made her heart beat faster. He spotted her watching him and smiled at her, winking quickly. Minnie blushed and waved a little. Don just winked at me, she told Athena in a whisper. In church? Athena asked. Mom is going to flay him alive. Your mom isn't going to find out, is she? Minnie had never in her memory stood up to Athena, but she gave her a look daring her to tell her mother. Athena sighed. I guess not. It would have been fun to get him in trouble though. Minnie plopped down beside Athena. It was fun when he was just your brother. He's my boyfriend now, and I don't think it's fun at all. Fine. Does he know about the big move yet? Minnie shook her head. I haven't talked to him since I got home last night. I figured I'd tell him while we cooked today. We're not exactly texting each other a lot yet or anything. Well, you should be. Sexy texting can be fun. Just don't tell me about it if he sends you naked pics, because you. Minnie blushed and laughed, shaking her head. I don't think he would, and I wouldn't tell you if he did. Did he kiss you? Athena asked. None of your business, Minnie said. She'd skipped over that part when she'd told Athena about their date. Wow. Dating Don is changing you a lot. I'm not sure I like it either. I do, Minnie said. I like feeling better about myself, and I do now that we're dating. I've spent my whole life in love with your brother, and it's time something actually happened between us. I know it is. I just wish you'd tell me everything like you usually do. Don is my brother, and you're my best friend. I want details. You're not getting them, Minnie said, proud of herself for standing up to her friend. It was about time she didn't let Athena railroad her into making the decisions Athena wanted her to make. Fine. Keep your secrets. But when you want a matron of honor, you'll ask me what color I want you to wear. Don't pretend you'd say no to something so important, Minnie said, shaking her head. Your threats are meaningless. I know you too well for that. Athena groaned. I need to go find a new friend who will believe me when I threaten them. It's the only answer. Or just keep on being my friend and loving me and stop threatening me maybe? I suppose I could do that, but I'd be missing out on a whole lot of fun. And so would you. I think I can take it. Minnie looked up to see Dawn standing beside her in the aisle. Mind if I join you? Minnie elbowed Athena to move over, and she scooted toward her friend, giving Dawn the spot on the aisle. Good morning, she said with a smile. Good morning. So, what's this I hear about you being pregnant? Minnie wasn't even surprised that the rumor was now out there after the way Mrs. Calendar had yelled earlier. I'm not. Mrs. Calendar was just being weird. I told her I was in trouble, and she jumped to conclusions, Minnie whispered. What kind of trouble? Dawn asked. They were getting ready to start, but he couldn't wait until after the service to find out what was wrong with her. Minnie hadn't wanted to talk about this with him at church, but apparently, she had no choice. Angela found a new roommate, and I have to be out by Saturday. I'm going to move into one of the cabins at the Calendar Ranch for now. Is there even a kitchen? He asked. She shook her head. No, but I have a mini fridge in my room with an attached microwave. I'll take it with me, and I'll manage. Can Angela really kick you out? I'm not on the lease, and she says I don't keep good snacks around, so she found someone else. I see. Well, next time you get a roommate, work on that snack problem, he said with a grin. I do think living at the Calendars will be better for you anyway. It will, but I hate to be in their debt even more than I already am. He frowned at that, but didn't ask any more questions as the pastor stood up in front of everyone and invited them all to stand up and sing. After the service, she followed him home to help him cook. Are you sure you have time to help me? He asked as they got out of their vehicles. Don't you need to pack? Athena brought me boxes, and we packed everything up before we went to bed last night. I'm ready. I only left out clothes to wear this week, and Athena and Aaron are going to help me move Saturday morning. And me. I'll help too. Dawn led her inside, and this time when she walked in, there was a cat sitting on the couch staring at her. You have a cat? She asked. Obviously. What's his name? Roxy. Short for Roxanne. Minnie laughed. You're even more obsessed with that play than I am, and I didn't know that was possible. Sure, it is, he said. I'm going to be teaching it this year. He led the way to the kitchen. I figured we'd have lunch and then start cooking. Are you okay with sandwiches for lunch? Of course. He pulled sandwiches and chips out, and they ate, talking about the cabin where she'd be living. I've only seen it once, she finally said. When I first started working there, they were just building them, and Janice showed me when she gave me a tour of the ranch. And it's going to be okay? Yes, it is. I assume all the bunks are still there, and I'll make my bed in one of them. Knowing Mrs. Calendar, she has someone out there cleaning it right this minute to get it ready for me. I'm glad you have a place to go and you're getting away from Angela. This might be a blessing in disguise. In some ways, she said. I mean, I'm thrilled to not live with Angela anymore, but it'll take some adjustments. He took her hand in his and brought it to his lips. If we'd been dating a little longer, I might have a better solution, but not yet. Minnie nodded. Athena said we need to take time to get to know one another before taking that big of a step. He choked on his drink. Athena said that? My sister who married a man the morning after she met him? That's what I thought. She said that she and Aaron had a rough first couple of weeks, but that it's good now. I had no idea. I really thought she was in her little version of paradise from the moment she laid eyes on him. Was he cruel or something? Minnie shook her head. She said they had different expectations and really should have gotten to know each other first. That was about it. And even if she had said a lot more, Minnie wouldn't have been able to tell Dawn. There was a special confidence level that she couldn't share beyond. I see. Dawn shook his head. She has a really good point. And not the one at the top of her head, Minnie said with a grin. Are you calling my sister a pointy head? Yup. What are you going to do about it? Agree with you, probably, Dawn said, a grin on his face. I figured you would. Minnie stood up and rinsed the plate she'd used, putting it into the dishwasher. What do I do first? Today is chicken day, so we're going to boil a huge pot of chicken up, adding celery and carrots and some seasoning. We'll use the broth we create for some of the recipes, and the chicken will be used in everything. I see. I do it very methodically. Last week was ham week, and the week before was ground beef. I don't like to eat the same thing all the time, but I don't want to cook it all at once. Sounds good. Tell me where to find your biggest pot, and I'll get started. She couldn't help but admire his frugality. Maybe it wasn't something most women would like, but when you grew up as poor as she had, you learn to appreciate someone who knows how to save money.